what we're going to do today is we're going to have a two-part presentation. The first is going to be a update in terms of what's going on in Ukraine and Russia from Antonina Broyaka, who's an employee in the Agricultural Economics Department at Kansas State. After that, we'll kind of have a market update from Dan O'Brien that will talk about price ramifications and where we are in the price situation as we get heavy into harvest at this time of year. Antonina's comments will revolve around three sections. The first is logistics in Ukraine. The second is production in Ukraine. And then the third will be Russian logistics. And we'll take questions on each part of those. And so we'll have two question periods in our presentation and then a question period at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to Antonina.
Thank you, Alan, for introduction. Hello, everyone. It is almost 7 months of Ukrainian resistance to Russian pledge, and we will continue to fight for our land despite any fake referendums that were announced recently. And today I will provide some updates regarding current situation in Ukraine, how much damages Ukraine received from the so-called Russian peace, how much we export and what is the state with grain agreement, and how much Ukraine have harvested and sown, and as well as Russian harvest and export. The counterattack of armed forces of Ukraine in the Kharkiv region became one of the greatest counterattacks. At the same time, for the aggressor country, this failure became the biggest defeat. And this military failure was the biggest for the occupiers in the war against Ukraine since the failed to capture the Ukrainian capital and were forced to withdraw from Kiev and Chernihiv region in the spring. So Ukraine liberated more than 500 square kilometers of Kharkiv region, more than 300 settlements where 150,000 of Ukrainians live. Unfortunately, terrible fines awaited the Ukrainians on liberated territories. Hundreds of murdered and tortured civilians and militaries, many people buried in the mass graves, wiped to the ground houses, and that was just horrible, and we're afraid what we will find next day. There is a still very dangerous situation on Zaporizhzhia nuclear energy station. Russians continue to use it as a shelter for their military equipment and as a prison. Another rocket shell arrived to Pivdano-Ukrainska nuclear energy station. And of course, Kremlin was looking for options on how to respond to our counterattack. And you know that today Putin announced real escalation of the war. He accuses the Western world of aggression and the desire to destroy Russia. And now Russia is going to include illegally to their territory Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia regions. And 300,000 people need to be mobilized to Russian army to protect announced sovereignty and territorial integrity of now so-called Russian territory, which is annexed Ukrainian territories. And that actually means that more people will die from both sides. Unfortunately, as of September 20, since the beginning of the war, 6,000 civilians were killed in Ukraine and 8,600 injured, and among them 391 children were killed, 764 were wounded, 232 children disappeared, and 7,754 children were illegally deported to Russia. Of course, we are losing not only people, but our infrastructure. Our cities have regular missile strikes. So due to latest estimates, damage caused to Ukraine infrastructure during the war amounted $114.5 billion. Since the beginning of the war, 422 individual enterprises have been damaged and destroyed. The amount of damages caused to enterprises and industry $9.7 billion. The largest share of the total amount of damages belong to the housing, fund, and infrastructure, that is 72%. Since the beginning of Russia's war against Ukraine, at least 15.3 thousand apartments, 116,000 of private houses were destroyed, 2.5 thousand of educational institutions, almost 1,000 of healthcare facilities, 250,000 of private cars, public transportation units have been damaged, destroyed. And as of September 5th, the total amount of losses amounted $130.4 billion, and the largest share of losses caused to the industry of Ukrainian enterprises, $30.3 billion. The minimum needs for restoration of industries have been reached $197.8 billion. The largest need for restoration are necessary for the housing stock, 75.3 billion, for infrastructure, 51.1 billion, and enterprises and industry, 19.7 billion. So the total amount of recovery needs takes into account not only direct damage, but also need to be considered general needs for recovery of the economy, as well as additional needs for modernization of assets. And according to the latest estimates, considering these categories, the total need for financing the recovery and modernization of the economy is $750 billion. Another big problem that Ukraine faces, especially in terms of agriculture production, is mine pollution. In Ukraine, an area of about 270,000 square kilometers needs humanitarian demining. More than 253,000 explosive objects have been disposed from the beginning of full-scale aggression. 1,760 kilometers of railway tracks, almost 3,000 kilometers of roads were cleared, and 70,000 hectares of territories were checked so far. But to complete total demining of territories contaminated with explosive objects can take from 5 to 10 years. So the situation is really dangerous, and we are really worried about the development of the war. But despite the war, we continue to feed the world. And actually, recently, Ukraine agreed to provide 50,000 tons of grain to African countries that are at risk of starvation, that is Ethiopia and Somalia, for free, just to support those countries. According to the State Customs Service of Ukraine, since the start of 2022-23 marketing year, and as yesterday, Ukraine has exported 6.4 million tons of grain and legumes, including 2 million tons so far in September. At the same date last year, the export amounted 11.7 million tons, including 2.9 million tons in September. So that, as you can see, that is almost twice less. The total includes 2 million tons of wheat, 557,000 tons of barley, 3.7 million tons of corn. Actually, that is much higher figure than previous year to this day. In 2021, it was exported 1.4 million tons to this day, but because we started export what was not exported previously, so our export of corn increased so much. Ukraine has exported 20,000 tons of flour, including 17.8 thousand tons of wheat flour. In the first half of September, Ukraine increased grain export by 69%. For 15 days of September, Ukraine managed to export 30% more than in the first half of August and 13% more than of the second half of August. And that is a positive dynamic of increasing export shipment by Ukraine to other countries. The structure of exports of products in the first half of September is the following. As you can see, cereals 1.8 million tons, that includes corn 49%, wheat 39%, and barley 20%, and increased to previous months, as I told, 69%. Oil seeds 555,000 tons, including 66% of rape seeds, 18% of soybean, and 16% of sunflowers, and increase compared to previous months is 21%. Vegetable oil exported 229,000 tons, including 92% of sunflower oil and 6% of soybean oil, and increase amounted 16%. In total, during the wartime, 16.4 million tons of agricultural products have already been sent abroad, including 12.5 million tons from March to August. In total, the amount of corn that left Ukraine during the war so far is almost 7 million tons, including 5.7 million tons from March to August. That is 45.5% of total grain export. This is primarily related to the end of the season, because traditionally at this time the Ukraine corn seasons to the end, and a new one began in September, October, and also due to unblocking seaports that we had chance to export more, that we had storage. The second position by the volume of shipment is wheat, 12.3%. The volume of shipped wheat for 6 months is 1.5 million tons. 1.5 also million tons of sunflower seeds were shipped, or 12.1% of total grain export under the war condition. 207,000 tons of barley were supplied in August, which is 23,000 tons more than in July. But it is 1.5 million tons less than in August 2021. The actual volume of barley shipment over the past 6 months is 446,000 tons. The sunflower oil shipment for the last months of summer compared to July did not change significantly, only by almost 9%. And on the other hand, compared to the last year, this year August volume is significantly higher by 52%. So as you can see, a total volume of shipment for 6 months in terms of crops is 5.7 million tons of corn, 1.5 million tons of wheat and sunflower seeds, and 1.3 million tons of sunflower oil, which is almost 11%, rapeseed 5.7%, soybeans 4%, barley almost 4%, and soybean oil is less than 1%. The export of agricultural products in terms of their shipping routes in August is the following: 2.9 million tons were sent through ports, 959,000 tons by railway, 625,000 tons by trucks, and almost 42 million tons by ferry. Thanks to unblocking 3 Black Sea ports, export increased significantly, and it's almost doubled since July, as you can see from the diagram. Totally, from March to August, 6.5 million tons of agricultural products were exported through seaports. But before the war, that was our monthly capacity. Even we could export at 8 million tons per month. So mostly now for all crops port shipment, corn dominates, and where so mostly for all shipments, mostly for all crops, port shipment dominates except the corn, where the railway delivery is still higher than port shipment. This slide presents month-by-month structure in terms of shipment types by different commodities. As we can see that more than half of all exports via railway is still corn. In August, we started intensive delivery of rapeseed due to new harvest. Almost 30% of trucks in August were used for rapeseed delivery. Ukraine increased seaport shipment of corn from 28 to in July to 41 in August. And in ferry situation is different. It is mostly used for oil cake, 44%, and sunflower oil, 35%. So there are some ferries to Moldova, Romania, Lithuania, and so on. Key issue under the war condition is, of course, logistic, and as you know, before the beginning of active hostilities, the main methods of grain export was, of course, sea shipping, up to 90% of all exported grain. And with the beginning of Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, the volume of rail transportation of grain cargoes decreased also by 3.5 times and amounted 982,000 tons in March, but still railway was our main route. In August, grain cargo transportation amounted to 2.9 million tons, almost 2 million tons more. 806,000 tons of grain were exported by Ukrainian railways in August, which is 28% of total volume of grain cargoes transportation by railway. It is less than in 2021 for 2.8 million tons. However, it is doubled compared to March. More than half of grain cargoes are directed to land border crossing points and up to 30% to ports. In terms of sunflower oil, Ukraine exported by railway 108,000 tons in August, which is 5 times more than in March. There are a lot of discussion about grain initiative, the grain agreement that has been signed in between United Nations, Ukraine, Turkey, and on another side with Russia. And due to this agreement, as you know, I talked about that in my previous presentation, 3 Ukrainian Black Sea ports were unblocked. That is Odessa, Chernomorsk, and Pivdenny. And Ukraine started to export grain to import-dependent country. And of course, there are a lot of discussion around that agreement, especially after Putin's statement that all grain was sent to Europe and only 2 vessels went to poor African countries. And there are many fears that Russia is going to break this agreement. I think there are several reasons for that. First of all, that even despite the fact that Russia can export now their grain and fertilizers, their export didn't meet their expectation because some countries do not accept goods from aggressor countries. And another reason that Turkey, which received actually privileges of grain purchase, already have got enough. But I think it's also just political narrative again. So I continue to track what is going on with this agreement. As you know, it was signed on July 22, and on July 22nd, the Joint Coordination Center was established and started work in Istanbul, in Turkey. And first vessel, Razoni, left Ukraine in August 1st. It was going to Lebanon, and that was long story that I discussed last time about this first vessel. So, but where we are now, as for September 20, that is for yesterday, 1.9 million ton of corn left Ukrainian 3 ports of Odessa, Chernomorsk, and Pivdenny, and 360,000 went to Spain, and almost 270,000 to Turkey, and 215,000 to Egypt. In terms of wheat, more than 1 million tons left 3 unblocked ports so far. Among them, 275,000 to Spain, 245,000 to Turkey, and 100,000 to Bangladesh. India, as usual, our main buyer of sunflower oil, 125,000 tons went to India of sunflower oil, 69,000 tons to Turkey, from total 243,000 tons of sunflower oil. Almost 240,000 on sunflower meal left Ukrainian ports, and almost 80% of this product went to China. Almost 200,000 of barley were exported under grain agreement so far, and mostly half and half to China and Spain. As for now, 178 vessels left Ukraine with more than 4 million tons of agricultural products. All of them successfully passed inspection in in Istanbul, And as you can see from the diagram, totally 47% of commodities delivered under grain agreement is corn, 26% is wheat, 6.5% is rapeseed. It is interesting that mostly the port Chernомorsk has been used the most, even though the biggest port is Pivdenny, but it is in use the least of all. In the pre-war period, the maximum monthly volume of exports of grain from these three ports totaled 3.6 million tons. So this is slightly less than we reach now in 2 months. So that is what we have now regarding our logistic. If there are some questions, I can answer.
Questions on logistics?
Antonina, this is Dan.
Yes.
We'd seen some ag media reports talking about some destruction, an estimate of say 10 to 14% of grain storage facilities being damaged. Can you comment on that? Do you have verifying information from home? Yes,
it is true. It is true. A lot of storages were damaged, and we're still working on this issue, especially on those territories that have been liberated. But also, I will talk about on my latest slide, some region already harvested more than they have storage facilities. So it is several options, or we would move our grain to other regions to store, or to use some alternative methods of storage, or just try to export directly, like from the field, that grain. So yes, there are many damages. And also, I saw the question before in the registration list about is Ukraine going to use storage facilities in Poland that United States announced that to be built. So are they going to be used this year? I think no, because it needs some time to finish them. So they're not ready yet. It's necessary some time. So, but there are some enterprises that actually rent or even buy some storage facilities abroad, for example, in Romania or Poland, and those storage facilities are used for Ukrainian grain.
There's a couple questions in there. The first one is from Cliff about what percentage of Ukrainian grain production is under Russian control at this point. I don't know if you can answer that in terms of grain production or land mass. Might also
yes, because if we would talk about regarding grain production, it depends what kind of grain. Like if we would talk about winter crops that we lost, it's almost 40% that we lost. But if we would talk about corn production, so it's not so high because the corn was in other regions. So yeah, but if we would say regarding the territory, so that is kind of like 14 to 15% of territory.
And so 14 to 15% of the territory
Yeah.
is the answer there, Cliff. Garrett Love indicated have seen the export numbers being way down, but are there estimates on the percentage below exports regarding the actual crop production? Maybe one of the things is what percentage of grain that is went through the seaports is last year's crop versus this year's crop? Have they started exporting this year's crop through any of the seaports? I'm thinking mainly of wheat.
I would say that talking about corn, that is still previous year corn. Regarding wheat, yes, I cannot tell you a percentage because it's hard to figure out now because the statistic is not really open. But yes, we started to export some wheat and also rapeseeds. That is from new harvest.
And any idea in terms of how much below the export numbers are compared to the crop that we anticipate? And that's kind of maybe going into your next slides. So you maybe want to answer that after you go to the next slides. But the issue is any idea in terms of what they can anticipate exporting of this year's crops, given the current pace?
That is hard question to answer because those, first of all, we need to empty our storages, and of course some countries, they expect new harvest, and new harvest is of course would be a different quality. I cannot say that it would be worse or better quality in terms that previous previous harvest grain was stored not in perfect conditions, but this year harvest is not also perfect. But I think we will try to export as we could this year crops as well. And I know that there are some already contracts for this year to be delivered in November, December. So I think we will try, if the grain agreement will still work, and it actually in November it needs to be re-signed because it's only for 120 days. So if we will continue to use our seaports capacity, I think we will follow our grain production with export.
Thanks. I think we'll maybe go ahead and have you do the next section, and then we'll come back on for questions after that.
I think that one question just showed up that we already answered it. Okay. So, oh, I forgot about one slide actually regarding the. I missed that slide regarding the grain agreement, and I just wanted to emphasize on structure of grain export according to this grain agreement. So as you can see, 61 vessels from 178 went to Turkey, carrying 15.5% of different commodities. And on the second place is Spain and Italy, but also China and Egypt also got many commodities. So from those two diagrams, you can just see that not only 2 vessels went to Africa and the rest went to Europe. So there's varieties of countries can prove that it's not true. So before talking about our harvesting progress, let's analyze what were our expectations for harvest. Our forecast for corn has been increased recently to 41.5 million tons due to both good yields and because some areas been liberated, but it is still 11 million less than in previous year, and we expect to harvest 10.5 million tons of sunflower seeds. That is less for 7 million compared to previous year. and our focus for wheat harvest just increased to 20.5 million metric tons, and barley to 6.5 million metric tons. So where we are now, as of September 16th, the harvesting of cereals and legumes in Ukraine was carried out by 6.5 million hectares. That is 61% of the planted area, of which almost more than 25 million tons of grain were collected with average yield 3.9 metric tons per hectare. In the context of crops that were reported, we harvested already 19.2 million metric tons. That is even more than our expectations a week ago. So barley been harvested 5.5 million metric tons with average yield 46.5 bushels per acre. We also harvested rape seeds. We almost done 100% with rape seeds, and we harvested 3.1 million metric tons with average yield 51 bushels per acres. We also started our sunflower harvesting. Sunflower is harvested less than 1 million metric tons, but it is still in progress, and it's only 10% harvested so far. So in terms of regions, you can see that in red, that is occupied areas, and we are not expecting to get any grain from there, especially after this announcement about referendums. In blue, that Kyiv, Mykolaiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, Chernihiv regions that were under active hostilities. You can see that we lost a lot of crops there. And this is actually the previous map that I had from regarding our storage facilities that we have, and just remind that is more than 13 million metric tons less that we had before the war. And I just wanted to emphasize that some region like Volyn and Lviv and Odessa and Ternopil region already harvested more than there are some storage facilities. So as I told previously, we need to think about what to do now with that grain, move it, and that is not the end of the harvesting season. So should we move it somewhere to other regions, or use some alternative methods, or maybe just sell it just from, as let's say, it's like from field. We also started a sowing campaign for winter crops, and we expect to sow 5.7 thousand of hectares. That is like 40% less than was planted in previous year, especially the biggest decrease in terms of winter crops, because winter crops mainly were planted on annexed areas. And for now, we expect to sow almost 4,000 4 million hectares. And also we expect to plant almost 1 million of winter rapeseed. But in general, that is only 63% of our previous year that been planted. And as you can see from those photos, that is condition how our farmers work. So they use all that military equipment to go to the field because it's really dangerous and you never know if there are some mines on a field, and you always need to be ready, unfortunately. This is kind of breakdown in terms of regions, where we are now and what we expect. Of course, we do not expect anything from Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Lugansk, and Kherson region unless we will liberate it. That's my hope, actually. But in other region, our crops also will be much less. And as you can see, we expect to plant just 62% of previous year in Kyiv region, 76% compared to previous year in Mykolaiv region, Sumy 88%, Kharkiv the last 43.2% compared to previous year, so only 225,000 hectares. Of course, it will influence on our grain balance, and we'll see how it will go. But for now, we expect for our next marketing year to harvest around 55 million metric tons in average, but we will see how it will go because of course we don't know how the war will develop, and also as I told, a lot of mines are on our field, and all those territories need to be demined to be fully in use. And of course, a lot of land was just damaged. And because our production will decrease, our export will decrease as well. And our optimistic plan for next marketing year is 38.8 million metric tons, but pessimistic is 22 million tons. But of course, we'll see how it will go, and hopefully we will be able to deliver as much as possible. So to make our harvest good and to increase our yields, we of course will need some fertilizers, and we don't have still enough fertilizers because it is because of some logistic and also because of some damage of roads that and we cannot deliver that. But as for now, some regions are really good with having all necessary herbicides and all plant protection products. They have enough, like my region where I'm from, Vinnytsia, or some western part like Zakarpattia and Chernivtsi region. So, but of course, it will be difficult to deliver all those fertilizers to occupied areas that is in red and to areas that were under active hostilities that is in blue. So for now, we have like 92 in general percent totally in Ukraine of our need, including 90% of herbicides, but of course, it's not equal from region to region. And another hot question, the winter is coming, of course, and Putin reminds us that all the time, that Ukraine is import dependent of natural gas, and our need for agricultural sector for this winter is shown on this diagram. So as you can see, we need in general 860 million of cubic meters of natural gas, and the biggest necessity that is for corn, and also for vegetable greenhouses, but also for processing and like sugar beets and dairy processing, some poultry production. So hopefully we will receive enough necessary amount of natural gas, but as for now, of course, we try to save that for also for civilian use, because we need to keep warm our houses during the winter. So that is where we now regarding our production. Alan.
Thanks. There is a question that came in from Fred Delano. He would like more information about the severity of the winter in terms of how cold does it get, and like maybe what would be an average January temperature to give people a feel for it. And I know it's going to differ from the sun.
Yes, it is differ from region to region, but also it's difficult for me to say in Fahrenheit.
Just
No.
give us Celsius.
Yes, so it depending from region. I'm in central part, that is kind of general. So usually in winter it would be like -15 in Celsius, could be -20 sometime. But we usually have much more snow than, for example, here in Kansas, and it helps us to produce winter crops, because snow would cover all winter crops, and that is kind of technology to keep crops warm and have some extra moisture. So that is how it works.
And so what would be a high temperature in the winter? You kind of gave the low temperatures of -15, -20.
Oh, during the winter, it would be around the highest, it would be around 0 Celsius, but it would be unusual, like several days. But on a coast, like more close to the Black Sea, of course, it will be more warmer and humid, more humidity there. Yes, and it is it is different.
Yep. And thanks for Shane putting the conversion in there. So -20 would be a little bit below 0
Yeah,
in
in
the
Fahrenheit.
Fahrenheit
Yeah.
scale, and certainly 0 would be right at 32. So
Yeah, I'm just thinking about those poor soldiers that are going to fight during the winter time. That will be really cold. Should we continue?
And will hostilities decrease there? And I know this is outside of your area, but in the cold weather, what's been in the past from Ukrainian history, or no idea?
During the, we have actually war since 2014 on the Donbass, and it never stopped even during the winter time. Yes, it's much harder, and I know that Ukrainians are collecting a lot of money now to buy for soldiers those special heaters that you can have a fire and keep them warm. So yeah, they need them for now really much.
And then
Okay.
transportation logistics, can grain move during the winter? Does grain
Yes.
typically move?
Yes, of course, because it doesn't stop. I mean, that doesn't make any influence on railway roads or ships. All those ports will still operate if agreement will work, of course. But I mean, usually all ports operate during the winter as well.
And then you did talk about some production there. Generally, the production was a little higher than expected, or it seems like the numbers have went up in the last month with regards to
Yes,
the amount
yes.
harvested.
Yes. As for now, our expectation growth, and actually our production is higher now rather than latest estimates.
And was that more from the area harvested, or was it from yield?
Both.
So both the
Both.
area harvested was up,
Yes.
in addition
Yes.
to the yield was a little bit better than expected.
Yes. It actually much worse than was in previous year, but it's still better than we expected.
And so even though it was a down year, it wasn't down as much as expected.
Yeah.
I think that's helpful. We'll have you finish up with your Russian.
Yes,
discussion.
just few words about what is going on with Russian production, and that is kind of indicators that I found from Ministry of Agriculture of Russia, and I was kind of that was interesting for me. That, as you can see, as of September 19, they reported that they collected 133.5 million tons of grain, including 97.3 million tons of wheat and 23.2 million tons of barley. And compared to the estimated harvest, that those forecasts were made by Ministry of Agriculture, by USDA, they were much less than they already reported that they collected. So I was really curious, where did they get that grain just in a week? I would think that that is, of course, grain that came from Ukraine rather than their own grain. And they report almost for every type of crops in huge increase. So the totally the increase compared to previous year is 33.2 million tons, and wheat is plus 25.4 million tons. And it is interesting that the sown area is also increased. So my thought just only about, is it their area increased or they included already annexed Ukrainian areas? But they report that that is according to huge increase of average yield. So we'll see, and that is not the end of the harvest period, right? So they would harvest much more, I think much more than 100 million tons of wheat, probably. Regarding the export from Russia, as you can see, the export in this marketing year is lower than previous, and I think that is really due to sanctions that they kind of work. But Russia expect to export much more next year. They expect to export 54 million of metric tons of grain, totally including 43 million tons of wheat. But the prices for their grain fell down I think Dan will talk more about prices and the market, grain market, especially after today's Putin announcement. But since the Black Sea ports were unblocked, the prices fell down, and they have this constant dynamic. They are falling down every week, and for now, for last week, average price for food wheat was $310 per ton. And a few words about total grain, total world grain prices. As you can see, the dynamic during the last week was negative, and prices fell down. But as I said, since today, the market kind of crashed, and a lot of stocks changed the prices, just depending on, of course, of where those stocks from Russian enterprises, they fell down, but for some others they just increased. So I think I will turn to Dan, and he will discuss that question more wide. And if somebody has some more questions, I will answer.
Yeah, there is one question from Nathan Ellis. He indicated in the last 24 hours, reports are suggesting Russia has been renewing attacks on infrastructure. Is there anticipation that Russia may continue to target the egg sector with increased mobilization? And so any thoughts with regards to the increased mobilization and how that may target? And again, it's a difficult question to ask simply because you're not, or answer because you're not in the minds of the Russians in terms of what they're doing. But any anticipation in terms of whether agriculture?
My personal opinion, they have some shortage of people in army, so that's why they were announced this mobilization, especially of the very successful Ukrainian counterattack. And they were desperate that they don't have enough people, and they even mobilized some prisoners just for amnesty. But this mobilization will also mean for Ukraine that we will also need to mobilize more people, and including farmers as well from rural area. So yes, it in my opinion, this will influence both Russian and Ukrainian labor market, of course. But I hope that it's hard for me to talk about it today. Sorry.
We appreciate that. Thanks for your comments, and I think we'll turn the rest of the time over to Dan. That's going to give a market perspective, and again, that's very difficult given the fast changing situations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Antonina. As we speak, the markets have been moving in a. I think they're kind of groping around to understand how quite to deal with the situation. Corn actually, as we're not done with today, but that trade is trading up as our beans. Excuse me, corn and looking at one issue there we go. Yep, corn, corn down 4 cents as we speak. November soybeans down 11 1/4. Wheat actually up 9, and that's. I could see where the wheat market could respond in a positive way to this. Not that this is positive news, but as on fears of constrained supply coming out of the Black Sea region from Russia and Ukraine, all that much more. So, and I think there are certainly concerns about the continuation. I think after the key date of November 22nd. the brokered deal for allowing grain to move out of Ukraine that Russia had agreed to. Do you have any information or thoughts on that, Antonina, before I start in on my other market info?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part of?
Yeah, any comments or thoughts on whether the brokered trade corridor agreement will continue off into the future? I guess I'm starting with the presumption that it probably won't, but what are your thoughts?
I just told during my presentation that it looks like Putin wants to destroy this agreement, but I think it is difficult to predict today after that announcement, but I hope it will continue, because I think world will force this problem, and I think this agreement will be continued. That is my personal opinion.
I saw one article before I get into my info talking about how it's a fine dance that the world's trying to do. On the one hand, they here you have an aggressor country that a lot of countries in the world aren't that pleased with. But on the other hand, they have a sizable amount of grain, whether it's all theirs or from other means. So still, they're one of the major suppliers in the world in a very, very tight supply-demand situation worldwide. And so it's a difficult dance to work through.
Yeah.
Let's go.
And some countries continue to sit, on the two chairs.
Right. Well, let's go forward. I'd like to give a market perspective. First of all, let's see here. There we go. Overall, we have a tight global grain and oilseed stock situation. Finishing up this marketing year, heading into the next. There's a lot of importance riding on the success of South America's 2023 soybean and corn crops. Now, their expectations are for record high crops, especially for soybeans. But they also are dealing with weather patterns that may not be friendly with that, particularly if the La Nina weather pattern continues for a third year, as being discussed. So in the wheat side of things, just as you and I discussed, Antonina, no margin in 2023 for shortfalls in global wheat producers. We're that tight. Corn production damage in the Western Central Plains in this year. It's no surprise, really, given the drought monitor and the desperateness of dry conditions. That's my bit of hyperbole today to use. Desperately dry conditions in Texas, Oklahoma, Western Kansas, and Southern Kansas, on up actually into good portions of Nebraska and into South Dakota. And so really our question now is, as we go on to these upcoming October, November, and then finally the January crop report for corn, will we have less than the 13.9 some billion bushels that had been forecast by the USDA or projected by the USDA in the September 12th crop production report? As we mentioned, there's the continuation of the dry weather, crop damaging La Nina weather pattern that we've been in now for a couple of years. Very, very abnormal to see this happen, but yet here it is. So until further notice, until we actually see a change in ocean level water temperatures, that we're going forth on the idea that things are going to be dry, and in these dry areas of the Western Plains, there really hasn't been a break in that. So it's no surprise to them that this is continuing, and we're looking at I guess asking the question about will we have a continued high fertilizer and other crop input costs in the coming year. High natural gas and logistics costs, supply chain challenges. That's a polite way to say that what's happening in Europe between Russia and the Nord Stream pipeline, if I had the name right, and all the energy cost tremendous extreme increases that are happening in countries like Germany, et cetera. Again, what will that do in the fertilizer market, especially for nitrogen fertilizer coming from natural gas, and of course in the world market, Russia also is a supplier, I think, of phosphate fertilizers as well. I hope I have that right. So anyway, we're going to make confident assertions of our ability on the international scale of agriculture to recover from our current situation, but yet our underlying key input, along with seed, is that of fertilizer, and we have major questions with regard to how much fertilizer we'll have available in countries, and so with these issues afoot, this may limit U.S. corn acreage response to what are very good prices. We're dealing with right now, trying to figure out where producers in the central and southern plains of the U.S. What they'll do in terms of wheat acreage. Key would be soil moisture prospects in central and southern plains. Also, another factor, strong crop insurance planting prices. We just went through the price discovery period. I think that the hard red winter wheat planting price is $8.79. Just finished up this price discovery period here on September the 14th. So not a trifling cost, particularly when you look at what cost of productions are. Cost of production has certainly gone up. It's probably not to $8.79 yet. Impact of ongoing possible geopolitical conflicts. And Antonina, as you're talking through these issues, in my mind, I think world supply demand balance sheets and factoring in lower production out of Ukraine, challenges, frictions in getting wheat out of Russia, all in play in a very historically tight wheat market. So we have that, and we have the other issue percolating in the background in terms of China-Taiwan conflict. There was a headline just within the last 24 hours that, in essence, that China would say that they would entertain a peaceful transition of Taiwan over into Chinese control. Well, that's not necessarily in agreement with what Taiwan may or may not want to do. So it just keeps roiling up this uncertainty. If that issue becomes hotter and we start to see a disruption of global trade, then you've got a lot of major commodities and profit centers in U.S. agriculture affected. Soybeans for sure, grain, sorghum, we've seen this before, and likely all ag commodities impacted to some degree. So the Ukraine-Russia war has had enough impact, but if geopolitical conflicts ensue in that area of Asia involving China and Taiwan, then you're looking at global economic impacts as well as agricultural impacts. U.S. foreign ag response to 2023 of current grain prices, we would normally say, as economists, that ceteris paribus, everything else held the same. Well, you have a high price, you're gonna tend to attract more production, and you'll tend to drive prices lower. The problem with this situation, though, is that literally all of these commodities have high prices. There's not a weak market out amongst them. So we're balancing. We're balancing basically the profit opportunities amongst a number of them, and while underlying that, we have moisture and fertilizer input concerns that are inhibitors to these crops. Crop costs, we talked about high fertilizer, other crop costs may limit corn acres because of the intensity of crop input use in modern corn production, commercial corn production. We've seen already in the USDA supply demand balance sheets for corn, for soybeans, evidence that in the September WASDE numbers of the USDA shaving back usage and amounts. Well, some of that has to do with we don't have as much supply to work with, but high prices. We anticipate that would cause some rationing of usage amongst commercial users, livestock feeders eventually, and ethanol plants and millers and the like. So we're reflecting on reasons for high grain prices in the spring. I just wanted to bring one issue up. We had a tremendous time of high prices in spring of 2002. And the number one reason, yes, was worry and fear in the world market about Ukraine-Russia war. But on the other side, my friends and colleagues up in the Northern Plains, Frayne Olson, North Dakota State, Chad Hart from Iowa State, familiar with that area. We talked a lot about how prices on that run up we had this spring stayed strong all the way through, while people could still plant crops and come in before the RMA deadlines for still getting full coverage. But when we got those deadlines, that coincided pretty sharply with prices dropping off. So yes, we had Ukraine-Russia war issues, but we also had excessive wetness that affected producers' decisions. And I take a lesson from that as I look to seeding wheat this fall. We're aware of what those final dates will be here in the plains area. We'll probably wait for rain to see if we can do something other than just dusting wheat seed in, and then we'll see where we go. But we have a dicey situation in the wheat market setting up for the coming months. Overall prospects for grain markets. I think that what we've seen in the September USDA report and since then hasn't really changed the paradigm of the market to where we see grain prices as a matter of course now supported at high levels until grain markets somewhere out in 2023 or whenever start to become confident of larger crops and the rebuilding of stocks to get out of this tight stock situation that we're in. And so I would anticipate that we'll see strong cash prices. We'll see pretty decent new crop bids through spring and summer. But you have to ask then if we were fortunate enough, and I say that in all sincerity, to have great crops next year, then you'd anticipate that if we see the likelihood of stocks being rebuilt, that we start to see some weakness out in the fall of 2023. But that we have to actually get the moisture and the crops to get to that scenario. Ukraine-Russia war, what will be the continued impact on world grain markets? As long, there's nothing that's happened in the last 24 hours, Antonina, or anybody else listening, that takes away uncertainty in the grain markets. It just adds to the uncertainty, and that tends to support prices. And we although our fall crop harvest growing season is winding down, we're starting in on South American crops in Brazil, Argentina, and other countries down there, and you look at the timing of when those when those crops are being planted. Already we've entered the window for planting down in Argentina. So to me, it's an oddity. On the one hand, we have a government policy in Argentina where we've the government has withheld or taken some exchange rate. I want to be careful in my terminology. They basically taken policy moves to make it cheaper to sell crops, which farmers have taken advantage of. But so we're doing that at the same time. They're entering a planting season where it's exceedingly dry. So they're selling off their reserves. At the same time, they're going into a year where it's awfully dry. So I would hope on the back end of this, they haven't sold off their reserves and are heading into a third year of La Nina and could anticipate problems. But you can see that October, December, first crop corn for both and soybeans in Brazil. And again, September, November, December, also planting date for Argentina. So we'll be, given what's going on in the world, we'll be watching those weather reports pretty closely to see about that crop development. Did want to talk a little bit about the U.S. drought monitor and dry conditions. The U.S. drought monitor, as I understand it, basically gives us a picture of the depletion of the soil moisture profile. You can still raise good crops in a moderate to severe drought if you keep having rain that keeps replenishing the topsoil. And that, I think that happened in Iowa last year. At least that's what I'm told by my colleagues there, that, you know, they had some pretty dry situations, but they kept getting small rains and kept moving their way through. So here, this is not all doom and gloom in places like Iowa, but you see this is the latest drought monitor map that I could get hold of, and you see Southwest Kansas in exceptional drought, the highest rating possible. Parts of Southwest Nebraska, Northwest Kansas, a good chunk of the along the southern border of Kansas and Oklahoma, Northeast Nebraska. You've got a lot of pretty intensely dry areas, and again, the central and southern plains is where we grow hard red winter wheat mainly, and most of those areas pretty dry. And of course, the Pacific Northwest, some white wheat up in there too. And just one more view of this, you can see predicted soil moisture with any moisture coming right now. Again, awfully dry, nothing changing as of yet. And I would say that when you stand back and look at the world, it's kind of humbling in a way to look at these areas that I'm highlighting and to see that these basically, this is where we grow food of quantity enough in these countries to actually export beyond our borders. This is it. So it's kind of humbling. It's kind of concerning, really. Those areas, Europe, good chunks of what we talked about in North America, parts of South America, that little area over in India that is dry as right in wheat areas, and it turned them from an anticipated wheat exporter now to taking care of themselves. And I understand they may even, at least I've read reports, they may be an importer. Major drought in wheat producing areas in China. You have some dry areas in Australia, but generally they're anticipated to have a great crop given what they do in the eastern part of the country. So I guess if we could have a map on top of this to talk about the impacts of this ongoing La Nina weather pattern, we would probably have a fair story to tell in that the global weather patterns from this ongoing La Nina are certainly affecting our prospects for the coming year. I'd like to hit on a few things quickly, and so we'll move pretty fast. Corn markets, certainly can see these were the closes yesterday in the corn market. You can see at our highs that we'd had up to about $8, just under $8 earlier on in about mid to late May, had fallen off of that down into late July, early August, down to about 565, 563. But now we've gained about 2/3 of that back. I'm not a chartist, but we've gotten back up to about $7, closed at 692. And of course, this is following a lot of the I guess growing realization of a U.S. corn crop that's not 15 billion bushels. It's probably not even 14. So tight conditions, upward trend, and a lot of volatility. Cash prices in Western Kansas. Note cash corn prices at Colby's. You can see the different regions of the state. Those are 7s and 8s, and the major demand center in Kansas, Garden City, Southwest Kansas, with feedlots, some ethanol plants are $8.22, a basis of $1.30 over. Grain sorghum bids, all these are the top elevator bids. These are elevator bids. in Western Kansas. I had talked to a farmer meeting last week, put these up there. I thought they were pretty impressive. I was told, actually, I was confronted by audiences that said that those aren't the real leading bids. The real leading bids are basically are private bids by livestock feeders who are bidding high enough to attract grain by train in from the Central Eastern Corn Belt. So you add, how much do you need to add on top of that to attract those type of numbers? Prices bids closer to 9 to do that. So there's that much worry and concern amongst livestock feeders in that area that some of their bids are exceedingly strong. And anybody on here from the Eastern Corn Belt, if you're wondering where your competitive pressures are coming from, they're coming from the Western Corn Belt as we try to pull grain in by train from areas back to the east. And you can see basis levels. Again, Garden City, there's that strong area. You could see that, I guess we'd almost got up to about $1.80, 85 or so, have actually weakened some. We're only by about $1.25 or $1.30 over for basis levels. But you can see historically, normally we're at par or about even. Well, so the tightness of supplies out here in this area have caused this situation. And it's reaching into central Kansas, Salina. And again, that's whereas Garden City basis levels are above $1. Here you see Salina reaching to areas it seldom reaches. So all over this Western Corn Belt, as represented by Kansas, you're seeing tremendously strong basis bids to pull grain from wherever they can pull it from. And you can see that even the grain sorghum basis bids, which we're not typically feeding as much, we more export that's starting to move higher in Garden City and also in Salina. And you can see evidence on this corn supply demand balance sheet that came out in September. You see under the to the right, the 2022-2023 balance sheet, and you see a lot of blue negatives. So as there was an acreage adjustment unexpectedly lower, well, not unexpectedly, but a little bit lower, a reduction in yield, a reduction in production, 415 million bushels. And you can see the accordion effect that had on usage all the way down through that situation. And the ending stocks number, which is something I really pay attention to, it was 1.525 for the old crop marking year ending projected as of August 31st. And now it's down, now you're down about 300 million bushels from the previous year down to 1.2219. How much lower do you go? If we're short another 1 or 2 or 300 million bushels and for U.S. corn production, do you go below 1 billion? I think prices start to really move higher, and you go from there. Well, as we move quickly here, we've talked about acreage changes. You can see that, see the yield number. This will be much debated. This 172 that came out in the September report, the low end of that bid range in that report, the lowest estimate was 170.6. And if you plug in that 170.6 or about 171 and look at some scenarios on where that market might go, you look, if you go to that, you're from 13.994 billion bushels and the USDA projection down to 13.8, 13.824, about 160 or 70 million bushels lower. You can see the impact if you keep moving that downward. And you can see that you do eventually, if you keep scaling back production, you do get below a billion bushels, 1 billion bushel carryout, but the price in a very inelastic manner starts to really shoot higher. So that's what's at stake as we're looking at September. Well, we have the September report as the October, November numbers, and then finally the January annual summary. And you can see how that looks graphically. Here's where we've been. And if we keep moving sharply lower, this is, at least by my calculations, my estimates, this is where you could go. If you start, as you keep ratcheting ending stocks down, ending stocks, the stocks to use lower, and bring in all that much more rationing, and start to deal with prices that are record high. 689, 2012, 13 was the record high prior to where we're at right now. But if we move much lower, you're setting records all the way up. Antonina, this would be of interest to yourself. The impact of Ukraine not being in this market starts to show up, especially in the world corn supply demand numbers. I'm looking at world less China because of our challenges with looking at China. So at China's ending stocks. So we're comparing to the 2020-21 marketing year was a 10-year low, and we're just marginally above that. Stocks to use at 11%. The low recently 10. I did want to show these Ukraine numbers and if Antonina, as you're showing, if your numbers for production are coming in above this, then that'd be the green line. Then we're overstating the declines. But here are the numbers as the USDA they presented them in that September report. And yeah, you know, a dramatic fall off in production, a more dramatic fall off in exports, a growth in ending stocks. You see it from 5.6 to 11.4. That's that logistics issue and that inability to move grain out of the country very effectively or very efficiently. So I think that's an ongoing issue with Ukraine. Brazil intends to grow a whole bunch of corn to fill the need. Do they have the fertilizer? Do they have the moisture to do it? Fair question. And you can see, just wanted to show you the difference between the world less China and world ending stocks, and how many stocks are projected to be inside the country of China. 97 million in the rest of the world, 305 if you include China. So it's a big issue. I just want to show just quickly on sorghum. If we had it was kind of a quiet issue, not a lot of people talked about, but we had a drop. That if this in this drought area, grain sorghum yields fell from last year 69 bushels an acre down to 46. And if that is the final number, then you're at an area of production 252 million bushels we haven't seen since 2011 and 2012. So we grow grain sorghum right where the drought hit, and taking a pretty hard shot. And I do have it in essence, the USDA dropped that export number so much. In essence, I kind of recalculated what would happen if we have more exports of grain sorghum, particularly with short corn, than USDA projected. So we'll take a look at wheat. You know, you look at this chart, it's not too dissimilar to corn, except when we dropped off from those highs, we haven't come back up as much. Not as much dreadful worry, I guess, to use hyperbole, in the wheat market. It's still 963 on yesterday's close. And cash prices, you don't see positive basis levels, but you see cash prices starting at 911, 913 out in the western part of the state, going higher as you go to the east. And you see new crop bids that are likely to factor into producers' decisions of, you know, again, 874 on the low, 860, 874 across the state on the low side, and heading towards 9 on the other. So I think the market, even with how dry it is, giving every incentive it can to people to say, hey, we would like you to plant wheat, please. Basis levels just so kind of going sideways, not a lot to talk about in either a central part of the state or in the west. We'll be debating this issue of how much wheat will be planted. I have heard discussion of our neighbors to the south, Texas, that that even though they don't have moisture, that the crop insurance incentives and the ability to get cash in mid 2003 instead of later could lead to some sizable acreage plantings, even if they don't have moisture. So I guess that's what crop insurance programs are for. When you don't have hardly any place else to turn, you apparently go this direction. Wheat exports running on the low side of what we've seen historically, and I think I could put a sign here and say high value of the dollar is probably a big issue as to why the U.S. is less competitive with these other countries in terms of wheat exports. The world needs wheat, but our high dollar makes us a pretty expensive option to look at. So I, in essence, mainly looking at the high value of the dollar and where that could go. I put together some scenarios that basically are looking at how much U.S. wheat gets hurt by pretty much dollar incentivized reductions in U.S. exports, ceteris paribus, holding everything else the same, and things. If we really fall off the table from the USDA's projection, and I guess not that much, 25 to 50 to 75 million bushels, we're at a place in those demand curves, supply demand curve relationships, where price gets affected pretty heavily. So I guess for the sake of Kansas wheat producers, you always hope for decent selling prices. And you can see where we're at, and if exports continue to get negatively affected by high value of the U.S. dollar, if my thinking is right, it eventually really starts to whittle away at the U.S. It's not just Kansas producers, but for all wheat products, it whittles away at U.S. prices. We're at 15-year low, world less China wheat. And note, if you look at that chart, that thing's declining. It's getting tighter and tighter. Antonina, you're showing the impact of Ukraine's reduction in wheat production and their reduced ability to be a participant in the world wheat export market. So that's 10 million metric tons from 1 year to the next in tighter stocks. It's 20. Looks like it's 24 from 2 years ago, thereabouts. And you start looking at the reductions in Ukraine, not far off of that. Ukraine numbers, you can see the USDA's projection of production down from 33 million metric tons in 21-22 down to 25 and a half. And you see exports dropping off. You can see domestic use holding up decently, but probably thankfully for Ukraine, their stocks number isn't quite as dire here for wheat as it was for corn. Russia, there you can see that Russia projected to have the highest production, 91 million metric tons that they've ever had. And the high before had been about 85.2, 85.4. And domestic usage, exports, highest level ever, and also a buildup of stocks. And again, just to show you how important those Chinese stocks numbers are, and hopefully they're there. Soybeans, finish up for soybean numbers. You can see the fall off that we had from the high of about 16, 15, 75, something like that, down to a drop to about 17, probably 1280, have come back up to about 1478, 1480. So we've gained an awful lot of that back. Again, dry conditions and a surprise reduction in U.S. production. That September report, all at play. Cash prices, Western Kansas, from our Western Kansas view, a lot of variability. In the West, Colby, Garden City, about 1399, 1381. But you get back to the export areas, Topeka, Columbus, not far from processing, 1530, 1569 down in southeast Kansas. It's tremendous basis levels. New crop bids, about some reaching to about 1325, 1335. Basis, that blue line, hopping all over the place in Salina. So you either have trains or you don't, apparently. That's really an oversimplification, but that's how I view it. And you do see those negatives for US soybean supply demand coming into play. So some rationing occurring on crush, a little bit of, from year to year. Actually, the crush number from year to year showing a gain, although that number was reduced in the last report. Export numbers are showing more of a hit. That has to do probably with at least at this time, quantity coming out of South America, crowding out U.S. soybean exports. Planting numbers did come up with another scenario, basically looking at the lower dollar, the higher dollar impacting soybean exports, and then a combination of lower yields yet and lower exports. And you just end up spinning like a top and going either which way. But if you end up, if we just have lower exports, no change in production, you do increase the stocks to use a little bit, and lower price about $1 by my estimates. But if you have lower yields yet, along with those lower exports, then you're getting down to below 3% stocks to use, and add almost $2 to price. So that's the precipice or the cliff we're kind of walking along. And you can see that. So from 60% chance USDA is right, but a 40% chance of some other outcomes. Did want to show you on one last thing. Last issue here for world sunflowers. The world sunflower supply demand situation has certainly been affected by the Ukraine-Russia conflict. You can see reduction in production from 2021 to 2022. Sunflower oil, generally production still shown to be decent. Exports falling off some. But then you see Ukraine numbers for sunflower, basically a reduction of about 7 million metric tons, about 30%, not far off of your numbers, Antonina. And the processing of sunflowers, Ukraine sunflower, really showing pretty strong negative impacts, moving, falling off for about 1, 2, 3, 4 years in a row, and really down about exports down about half of where they were about 3 or 4 years ago. So this ongoing conflict certainly affected them.